Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Recurs, and in today's video it's pretty simple. We're going to be talking about what I believe might be one of the most underrated campaigns I've ever played in an FPS game. So let me give you a bit of history with my experience with this game. The last time I played this game was way back in 2005, and I didn't actually play the campaign. The reason I was able to play this game is because there was a youth club, and what happened was that one of the people who went to this club brought in the game itself. It was back when it was a disc formation. We had to wait on the installation. We finally got it, and we just played the multiplayer aspect. We didn't play anything to do with the campaign whatsoever. We just played a bit of the multiplayer. Then whenever they found out that we were playing it, they pretty much told us not to play it. We had to play their specific games. So yeah, that's my experience with this game. But I went back and I ended up playing the campaign mainly because obviously the multiplayer isn't available to play anymore. If it is, that's great, but I think you have to sign in for your old EA logins and stuff like that, and I just didn't have one, so there's no way for me to play the multiplayer of this game. So my only real experience of playing this game is the campaign, and it's the only thing I can really touch on. That being said, I have to be honest with you, this campaign is fun. This is a great campaign, and the reason it's a great campaign in my opinion is the characters. Now normally in a lot of these sort of FPS games where there's a group of characters, there's usually that one sort of character who you really take a dislike into at the beginning, who you think, oh man, I really hope something happens to this guy because I just don't like this guy. He's not a real, strong leader who you think I'll follow him in the battle. This game's the polar opposite. Every single one of the characters is such a likeable characters who they are, and it's done really well for you, all the banter and the conversations that they have. For instance, there's this one line in the game where the character pretty much downplays everyone else's, achievements on the battlefield and pretty much says that it's you, the main character, the character you play as, Tommy. It's pretty much him who's carrying the fort for everyone, who's the star boy of the team. And whenever the character says it, it's not taken in a sense of a real insult to any of the other characters. It's pretty much trying to get a bit of comedic value in other ways, grim, dark experience. And I mean, World War II was a dark experience, let's not sugarcoat it. I mean, games pretty much try and, make it seem like there was real heroism and there was a lot of, action set pieces. It wasn't. It was a really dark, gritty experience, and the lighthearted humour here and there really does break up the game itself and make you feel, you can take a minute and just sit back and experience the characters for what they are. And these characters, in my own opinion, are some of the best characters I've ever seen in an FPS game. And it's a real shame that this campaign doesn't actually get brought up enough. So it doesn't, especially whenever you ask people what their favourite World War II games are. A lot of people within certain series, a lot of people will say, Call of Duty World at War, Call of Duty World War II, the original Call of Duty, Battlefield 5. A lot of people will say, I know that game didn't get, a great reception upon release, but some people will say, the original Battlefield 1942. Medal of Honor, when it comes to their World War II games, Allied Assault and Frontline are pretty much the ones that come to mind when you say what your favourite Medal of Honor game is when you're speaking of the World War II games. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault, for whatever reason, doesn't really get brought up a lot, and it's a real shame because the work that the developers put into this game, you really feel that they took their time and they got, real dialogue, people in the right scripts, and they just wanted a game that people could sit back and go, this is a fun game, I'm enjoying it. Even though it's a real serious topic, I'm enjoying the game for what it is. And I think that is all due to the way the characters are written. The characters make this game feel like it's a living environment that you can enjoy it. Achievement to the actual raiders, because like I said earlier, in a lot of these games, whenever you have a sergeant who you're sort of following, a lot of the time they'll make the sergeant sort of be that hard exterior character who pretty much you think this guy isn't really likable. Your squad leader in this game is actually a really likable character, so he is, and it's one of those situations as you're playing through the game, you're like, I really want this core group of characters to make it out and be okay, because I've enjoyed the banter among them, I've enjoyed playing through the campaign with these core group of characters, and that's something that a lot of video games really struggle to actually get nowadays. A lot of video games nowadays really struggle to make you engage and relate to the characters. Every character in this game is an individual. It's not like they're just, bored up to, be, I don't know, another character just within the setting just to fill a group. These characters are made for the story, and the story works well because these characters help the story engage and continue on. Now, when it comes to the actual gameplay, I'm not going to lie, I'm not a big, massive keyboard and mouse player, so not for me, this is pretty much like getting into the wilderness, so it is, because I'm a controller guy. I've been using controllers since I was 5, and this is a real challenge for me to adapt the keyboard and mouse. But I do think one of the key advantages this game has is it doesn't really expect you to be a pro player the minute you walk in, so it's one of those games that I think that lets you take your time amongst it and lets you get a feel for the environment, which really helped me a lot. So that a lot of games nowadays, their first mission pretty much throws you into the deep end straight away, wanting you to do all sorts of action set pieces without really any proper training. This game's training regime is really slow, it's really straightforward, but overall the gameplay itself isn't fast paced. It's actually slow and lets it build up. and that was something that I found myself did help me quite a bit when it came to adapting the keyboard and mouse for this game. I don't know if there's any controller support. I didn't really want to play the game on controller if there is, mainly because I wanted to sort of make that jump to keyboard and mouse at some point, and this is a great game to actually get you into it. Now, my biggest issue is that a lot of times nowadays keyboard and mouse controls are pretty universal. What you use in Call of Duty is pretty much what you'll use in Battlefield, and it works across the board the same. This game you have to change up the keyboard and mouse keys, a couple of them. The majority of them are the straightforward ones you expect, but there is those ones that you have to maybe change, like for instance crouch I think wasn't even seen this game when I started off, so you have to do a bit of key altering and pretty much just make the keyboard and mouse feel the way you want it to feel and modernize it, if you will. But other than that, the gameplay itself is smooth, it's crisp. I did have a couple of experiences where the game was sort of lagging a bit or staggering, but I think that was mainly because my graphics card needed an update. After I updated the graphics card, the game ran smoothly without any issues, and I could sit back and enjoy the game. Another thing to point out, this is actually the first time the main studio behind the Medal of Honor franchise in the early 2000s, EA Los Angeles, or EA LA, this was the first time that they actually developed a game for the PC. I know 2 years prior, Medal of Honor Allied Assault came out exclusive for the PC, but that game was developed by 2015 Inc., who would later go on to become Infinity Ward and create Call of Duty. This was EA Los Angeles' first attempt at making a multiplayer component. Again, I didn't play the multiplayer component when I go back and look at this game. This was their first attempt of doing that and working exclusively on PC. And I think it really shows a lot of the stuff that they've put in this game is stuff that I think they wanted to put in the Medal of Honor Rising Sun, which came out a year prior to this game, but obviously due to technology and what was available on PC versus back then the original Xbox and PS2, they just couldn't put a lot of the stuff that was in this game in Medal of Honor Rising Sun. And it shows, I really think when it comes to the two games, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault and Rising Sun, both games share a lot of similarities in terms of setting and overall theme. Both of them involve the attack on Pearl Harbor sort of thing, but Pacific Assault, for me, in my opinion, is much more enhanced and widened experience. I mean, there's obviously, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that they can put in this because it's a PC exclusive game that they couldn't put in Rising Sun, so there is, because obviously the technological advances were far different when it came to PC and console at the time. And it also says a lot, the critics pretty much panned, well, I don't want to say panned, they were very mixed when it came to Rising Sun, whereas with Medal of Honor Pacific Assault, it was, I don't want to say it's the polar opposite, but it was a lot more positive towards Pacific Assault. And I think that's because, like I say, the developers, you can tell with this game, are actually getting to do what they wanted to do with this game, whereas with Rising Sun, they didn't really get a lot of the freedom, I think, that they wanted, because, again, you still have to adhere to the Medal of Honor formula, which is, one-man soldier sort of thing, and a lot of that situation. With Medal of Honor Pacific Assault, they changed up the formula quite a bit, so that now, there's an argument to say that they borrowed heavily from Call of Duty, which came out a year before at the time, but at the same time, this game felt like a real new, fresh experience for a lot of Medal of Honor fans, and you can definitely feel that within this game. The fact is, now we're going from a one-man army approach where you're very spy-orientated theme to a much more large-scale platoon war-orientated story. And like I say, the characters make the story work. It's all to do with the writing and the characters. It's a fun experience, and I really do recommend anyone to jump on and play this game, especially for the campaign alone if you haven't. One of the other things that I want to touch on is the soundtrack or the score, and this was composed by Christopher Leonards. Again, I probably butchered that name, but I hope I haven't. Sorry if I have. But he actually returns. Now, he was actually a new composer that was brought onto the series in Medal of Honor Rising Sun. Prior to that, they actually had Michael Giacchino do the score, so he did for Medal of Honor 1999, Medal of Honor Underground, Allied Assault, and Medal of Honor Frontline. Christopher Leonards was brought on with Rising Sun as his first game, and while the score in Rising Sun isn't really all that memorable or anything that stands out, you really get the feeling, again, him also, when it came to this game, this was the soundtrack he wanted to make. He really put everything into the soundtrack, and in my opinion, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault has one of the best soundtracks within the game. I know Medal of Honor as a series has loads of memorable soundtracks. Obviously, the original theme composed by Giacchino. Then you have the reboot soundtrack with, Ramin Djawadi. Apologies if I butchered that name. This game, this soundtrack alone, this was, in my opinion, one of the very best FPS soundtracks of all time, because you really get a feel in the sense of the huge scale and the gravity of the story, and it adds to the game quite a bit, so it does. Again, Rising Sun score wasn't all that memorable. This score is, and again, like the developers, I think this is the soundtrack he wanted to make, but maybe due to timing and not having the right resources, he wasn't able to do this sort of soundtrack for Rising Sun. If you like the soundtrack in Rising Sun, that's great. If you really do care all that much about soundtracks, again, that's entirely up to you. But for me, a good soundtrack, a good score really helps further the game even more, and it did with this game, because this game to me felt an emotional ride based on soundtrack alone. So in conclusion, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault, in my opinion, just based on the campaign alone, is definitely worth a play for you if you haven't played the campaign before, or maybe it's been a long time since you've played it. You will obviously have a couple issues here and there when it comes to the controls, but they're easy enough to change if you lay out your keyboard a certain way. So it is, if you're a controller player like me and you're wanting to pick up a game that's, you know, something that you may feel a bit more suited to you, a bit more slower paced, this may definitely be a great game to jump in on. The enemies aren't too difficult to defeat, so not the missions aren't too long. Again, there was a couple performance issues, but I think that may have been my own fault itself because I hadn't updated my drivers or anything like that. But overall, the game was a fun experience nonetheless. There's a mission near the end of it where you're actually piloting a jet, and this was probably the most difficult mission for me, so it was, because I'm not someone who has great experience even with console when it comes to vehicles on FPS games, so it was a real hindrance for me. But other than that, the game itself is a fun experience. It has a great soundtrack, and overall I think you'll get a great enjoyment out of this game. I really recommend it, and the fact that this game never really gets brought up in the conversation of the best Medal of Honor games, in my opinion, is it's a crime. So it is. It should be brought up more often than not. It's a real shame that I can't go back and talk about the multiplayer, because I really feel the way I like the campaign of this game, I really feel like the multiplayer probably would have been just as good. Obviously for its time it would have been very limited, and there's a couple of things here and there. Obviously the audio doesn't exactly always sync up great when it comes to the characters and stuff like that, but the soundtrack, not the soundtrack, apologies, the dialogue and writing is what I meant to say, is perfect for these characters, and really makes you feel like every character is an individual. One of the things that I forgot to touch on actually earlier is the fact that you now have squad commands. This was the first time that the game had actually implemented something like this, and I really feel that this was sort of borrowed from Battlefield, and they expanded upon further so that within their own game you can actually ask for health instead of the traditional health packs that were in the Medal of Honor games before. You can actually ask for health from a member of your squad. And this to me is something that really benefited not just me as a new player to PC, keyboard and mouse, but I think it'll benefit all sorts of players in general, because instead of having to get so far and then find out that there's no health pack when you're on your last limbs of health, it can really be beneficial knowing that you have 5, realistically they are health packs, but they're all based on when you want them and not whenever the game positions them. You can also tell your squad to attack and stuff like that. For me personally, I pretty much forgot the button to do it. Again, I'm a noob when it comes to keyboard and mouse, so please have some sympathy for me in that aspect. But other than that, like I say, it's a fun raid and I think you'll really enjoy it. In my own opinion, the developers of this game really hit something perfect with this, so that this game, in my opinion, being a PC game, allowed them to do a lot more, so that it allowed a lot more creative freedom. And in my own opinion, I think that they should have followed this approach with European Assault. I don't think they should have pivoted that towards a console release, but obviously EA probably looked in their portfolio and saw that they had Battlefield that would occupy the PC consumer base with the multiplayer experience, and they still wanted to cash in on the traditional console aspect with Medal of Honor European Assault, and that's why, in my opinion, EA chose to make Medal of Honor European Assault a console game. But that also handcuffed the developers again, because the experience and the freedom they had with the PC of Pacific Assault, they couldn't do them with European Assault. And European Assault, in my opinion, is a good game. It's just really, really limited, and again, a lot of people probably felt like that. And if you play that game on the graphics and upscale that maybe Pacific Assault had, I think that European Assault could have been a much more welcome experience, and you could have also added the multiplayer aspect. I think this was a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of mistakes EA, in my opinion, have taken when it comes to the Medal of Honor series, and this was just one of them, so it was, guys. The set pieces in this game are great, the map's great, the graphics are great for its time, and overall it's a fun experience. A couple moments, like I say, here and there, a couple hiccups and that, but overall I really recommend this game.